This is performance funding.
Right, so there's a couple of slides pertaining to those components that basically say, what are the implications for this working group? And so that's why we've even included this. Then we've got 5 public university funding model scenarios that were proposed either by CPE staff or university officials. And you can see those 5 listed there. And then we're going to turn it over to KCPCF, and they're going to share some information with you as well. So let's go ahead, Sean, and you take it from here and tell us about the 2023-24 performance distribution.
Sure thing. You can see on this slide, the $75.8 million distributed. Man, it's small. Let's get in this room. $75.8 million distributed last fiscal year versus the $75.8 million distributed this fiscal year, and the dollar difference. And the institutions that have the green highlighting had an increase in distribution amounts. UK, the U of L, and NKU. EKU, Murray, and Western had less of a distribution in the current fiscal year than they did last year. And then in terms of the hold harmless, Morehead State University's hold harmless increased by $1,072,000, and KSU's hold harmless increased $68,400.
And why is that?
It would be a change in performance because the dollar amounts for the base and also for the performance fund were exactly the same.
Yeah, and this is actually unusual that you have the exact same amount of adjusted net general fund and allocable resources running through the funding model in the current year that you had last year. And so it makes for a real ready comparison. There were no changes in the model or the model weights or metrics, no changes in the amount, and no changes in the amount that's available to be funded. And so the only thing that's driving this difference is changes in outcomes prediction. And UK, U of L, and Northern produced more of the 11 metrics above the sector average than the others. And you're going to see that in just a minute, but performance is driving the outcome.
And to the extent that you perform below,
It's taking dollars away.
it increases the whole harmless.
Yes. Or it reduces the amount of your distribution from one year to the next. If you have more metrics that are below the sector average increase. Go ahead, Sean.
Bill basically presented my next 2 slides. In your materials, you have this table 7, and this is just a sample of table 7. It's just the bachelor's degrees component and the URM bachelor's degrees.
Yeah, the STEM was that.
STEM plus H bachelor's degrees and URM bachelor's degrees. And you can see that institutions so highlighted in yellow performed above the sector average. So for example, University of Louisville, 1.1% increase actually in STEM plus H bachelor's degrees. The only institution to have an increase in STEM plus H bachelor's degrees produced one year to the next in terms of the model years. They were above the sector average, and their share went from 20.1% of that pool's allocation to 20.7%. And so that's an additional funding for the University of Louisville because of that metric, and so on and so forth for the 11 metrics in the funding model.
And one last thing I'll say, Sean, if you look at the second column from the right, the 2023-24% share, those percentages are applied to what you see in red font in the upper left-hand corner, the pool size. So for the STEM plus H bachelor's degree, that's a $29.8 million pool. For the URM bachelor's degree, that's a $17.9 million pool. And those shares for 2023-24 are multiplied times those pool sizes, and that determines how these funds are going to shift. But it's not just these 2 metrics, it's 11 metrics.
This next slide should be familiar. We call this the metric scorecard. It shows in a very simple way the institutions that scored above the sector average for a given metric. And you can see University of Kentucky far left had 9 out of the 11 metrics above the sector average. University of Louisville at 7 out of 11. Murray and Northern both at 6 out of 11. And this is a very simplistic look at who the winners and losers were.
Everybody's a winner.
Everybody's a winner, but this slide just goes over that UK, U of L, and Northern, 3 out of 4 universities that recorded growth rates above the sector average on 6 or more metrics increased their performance distributions between last year and this year.
Just to clarify something, go back to the first slide on these growth rates. One more back. I mean, just to understand though, when you look down, for instance, at URM, University of Kentucky has the largest enrollment in the state. It went down by 7. Okay. It's minus 0.8%. You're competing against yourself in many ways. In many ways, you're on it.
And
once you're at parity.
And it's the percent change that's going to drive whether
Exactly.
you increase your share or you decrease your share.
That's exactly.
Thank you for making that point. Sean should have made it, but I'm glad you.
Continuing on, 3 institutions had growth rates below the sector average on 8 or more metrics. They registered the largest decreases in their distributions or whole harmless amounts. There's a correlation between number of metrics that an institution achieves with growth rates above the sector average and change in that institution's performance distribution. And so it's just further validation that the funding is being driven by changes in outcomes. And then here's a look at state funds for educating students. The chart on the left goes 2016-17% share of funds for educating students. So the distribution of those funds for educating students, and then also 23-24. So this current fiscal year, and the percentage point difference is on the right of that chart on the left. 1.9% growth at University of Kentucky. That was the largest percentage share increase, and then the lowest percentage share decrease, the largest decrease, Morehead State University, 1%.
1 percentage point.
1 percentage point funds for educating students from 5.1% to 4.1%. And then the chart on the right is an update. You've seen this before, but this is state funds for educating students per full-time equivalent student. The blue bars FY 2016-17, and the red bars 22-23, and you can see a move towards parity, if you will. But this is, of course, just one way to look at fairness. Funds per FTE.
1 out of 11 ways we look at.
1 out of many ways. Correct.
President, can I ask a question?
Sure.
And as indicated in that bullet, even though the chart on the left shows that UK and Northern have increased their share of state funds for educating students since the funding model was implemented, UK is still the lowest within the research sector in terms of their funding for FTE. And Northern is still the lowest in terms of their funding for FTE compared to the other comprehensives. I think it's also worth pointing out that every institution, with the exception of KSU, saw an increase in their funding for FTE. Thank you very much, General Assembly, for that $80 million in new funding that helped in that regard. But it was also driven by declining enrollment at many of our institutions. So that's why the funding for FTE is going up.
For the institutions that had a decline in performance funding because of the metrics, if you would elaborate, what were the reasons for that, or do you know, or could you share some insight as to what caused that result?
I have some pretty sophisticated tables and charts, but I don't have them in front of me. And we can certainly get those to the group.
And were you talking about the metric scorecard, why did some institutions?
Yeah,
Some
I
of
think that's
them
what he's asking.
do as well
Yeah.
this year as they did the previous year. So my question was, what factors influence that change?
Well, declining enrollment is
I wondered if that might
one
be
of the
part of
major
it,
drivers.
because there aren't as many student numbers there.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying a decline at many of our institutions in terms of their earned credit hours. That feeds into the pipeline. And so if you look at the student progression at 30 credit hours, student progression at 60, you're
If
starting
you've
to
got
see
fewer
those.
students enrolled, those numbers are not belong.
Yeah, you're starting to see drop offs there. It hasn't hit the student progression at 90 yet. It hasn't hit the degree production yet.
Well, but
Well,
you're
while we're
also,
thinking about this model, since that's driving a lot of it, what are the thoughts and predictions on student enrollment in the next 3 to 5 years?
well, that's interesting. I'm speaking about that, as Lee knows, in 2 weeks. Kentucky is one of only, I think, 2 states in the nation that actually rebounded from COVID. Now, let me be clear about many of our campuses are getting out of state students. We've had a declining K-12 going to college rate. So without a doubt, if we don't get in the next 5 years, if we don't get more adult learners, we're gonna see a big decrease going down, because right now we're grabbing what we could grab. And we've had, number 2 is increased performance. All our campuses have increased performance significantly, you can tell here, which actually has helped enrollment until they graduate. Then that hurts.
Do you believe that because
College going rates.
the dramatic increase in wages and jobs in the last 2 or 3 years, that students are choosing to go directly into the workforce versus going to post-secondary?
It's interesting, yes and no. Let me tell you why yes and no. I know we're getting off a little bit,
Sure.
but what we have is about 50, we actually have 48% of high school students not going to college anywhere. I'm talking college, I'm talking about KCPCS any. What we found is about 30% of those are really actively working, if you want to call it that. Then you have a significant number of people that are not,
Disengaged.
they're disengaged, they're not working. We have less adult learners, not all of them, and yeah, many are in sustainable jobs, but many of those are not. If you look at those that have dropped off unemployment, this is why I'm not unemployment records, but KY stats allows us to look at all of those. So we're seeing though many of the people are getting jobs in what I call non-sustainable jobs. They may be getting $18 McDonald's jobs because right now they're in great need for some of those, but we know those are not sustainable living wage jobs. So it depends on how you measure that amount. So the way I look at it, about 30% of that 48% of high school students we're not getting are probably going into the sector more. We probably have another, it's an educated guess, another 60% of adult learners who are out there working and making money, they're employed and so on. But then we've got about 600,000 of those in Kentucky that we need to actually help get skilled up with some credential or give them a credential. So, and you guys may want to add a little more to this, but what we know, if you don't increase college going, we're in trouble, Representative Tipton. And if we don't get more adult learners, we're in trouble. And once again, if we don't actually increase performance, even though we've done a really good job, number 2 in the nation, actually, I bow to all the folks around the table, but we still have a long way to go. And you're right, 5 to 10 years, we'll see some of these going down if we don't actually interact.
So a university could be doing a fairly decent job, but because of declining enrollment numbers, not get any boost from the model.
Mr. Chairman, I spoke to Kentucky Association of Manufacturers a couple of weeks ago, and they were having their annual meeting, and where they're talking about a couple of things, but I think that one of the challenges we face is that the college going rate has to do some academic readiness. But the workforce participation, so there's this notion that I can't go to college or I shouldn't go to college, I'm also not going to work. And I think there is a real challenge there. And we've got a lot of students who are just not participating in anything. And so there's got to be some, I think we've got to put some thought around that, because a lot of our manufacturing sector is looking and saying, my workforce is 55, 60, and now there's nothing behind that to fill that.
Well, and I want to speak on that quickly because there's 2 points there. That's a little bit of positive, but still a lot of negative. We're 48%, workforce participation over 43, and that direct correlation with us increasing has been the credentials that we put on the table to increase. But David's right. So when you have workforce participation rate at that level, that doesn't mean.
Let me add, Kentucky's workforce labor participation rate is lower than the national average at the outer end of age groups. We're not having trouble with 20-year-olds in Kentucky compared to the rest of the nation. So our deficit is 50-year-olds and older, is where our, let me just, kind of contrast with, I don't think we've got a problem with 18 to 20-year-olds participating. It's compared to the rest of the nation.
John, where we do have a problem to the chairman's question also is you want to move the needle quickest and the best. It's the college going rates, which have continued to climb in Kentucky, as well as other states. But it's to a point where it's impacting a lot of what you're seeing today from a performance standpoint.
And I'm not saying by comparison, Secretary, I'm just saying though, when you have a 48.7% from high school and college, it will sooner or later have an impact. If we have a downturn at all, it will have an impact on the economy, a significant impact. So my mind, we're charged with increasing an educated workforce that would align with Kentucky's economy as the way that I.
Mr. President, I don't want to get too far off in the weeds, but I think all this ties in together. President Shannon talked about maybe some lower academic results in the K-12 world with the learning loss that we've seen from COVID. How concerned are the universities that as those students age into the college going age, they're not going to be as prepared as they need to be to succeed?
We're already feeling. So when you look at the students that need difficult support, particularly in math, it's already there. And so what we have to do is be responsive to that and focusing on retention. That's what we're focusing on. You got to create a support system outside of the classroom or additional support to help them get through. Not just that first year, but get them into the curriculum. But we're feeling all that.
And that's where performance funding would be beneficial. You receive those performance funds to help pay for those issues.
The issue that we have also, Jay, I'm sorry, and I'll let you speak on that. The issue that we have too is not just academic preparation. We've got social, emotional, mental health. 3 out of every 5 college students now have mental health issue. I mean, so on. So the idea of building what I call that human infrastructure on our campuses to do that looks a whole lot different now than it did when I was the enrollment manager, David, at ADKU 20-some years ago. So, but you're right. I mean, so a college student now looks different, both in age and preparation in all those areas. You're absolutely right. Jay, I'm sorry.
Thompson, I'd like to ask maybe for some clarity on slide 8 and the chart on the right-hand side, just so I can kind of grasp this concept. And we'll kind of look over at my friend Bill Payne here a little bit. If I read this table right, page 8 on the right, fiscal year 16-17, prior to performance funding, my institution, according to this chart for FTE, was overfunded per student relative to many of the rest of the schools here around the table. If I fast forward and look at 22-23, this immediate completed year, the institution that I represent is now underfunded because 4 other institutions are funded higher than us. As I read that chart, because the state is all one big sector. We don't have multiple sectors here. So according to this chart, Morehead State University is underfunded relative to the state of Kentucky. So how is it that Morehead State has not received any money for the past couple of years when this chart shows that we are now underfunded because 4 other institutions are funded higher than us?
Well,
So help me, I guess help me involve my way through that.
in the president's only meeting, I cautioned against looking at just one metric. And for example, the University of Kentucky looks like it's about $790 less well-funded per student than the University of Louisville, but that's using one metric, which is FTE students. The model that, or the approach that we use to determine parity, if you will, is we look at 11 metrics. And according to the funding model, UK and U of L are funded in parity. Moorhead is still not funded at parity with the others. And you're, I hate to use the term underfunded, overfunded. You have more dollars given what you're producing than some of the others. I think all of our institutions are underfunded, and we're going to try to make the case with the General Assembly here in a month or two. But in terms of the funding model itself, President Morgan, you have about $1.2 million more given what you're producing than the other institutions.
Based on the 11
Based on the 11
metrics.
But if you were to look at it just purely on a per FTE, state funding per student basis, you're correct that Murray and KSU are funded much better on a per student basis than Moorhead.
Bill, I guess a nuance I'd like to make here that we use the word sector, and it's a 4-year sector. I mean, we are all, the funds are allocated to the 4-year sector, but we continue to compare as though the institutions are sectors within a sector here. So I'm not sure that we're there because the funds are not allocated that way. Funds are allocated to the 4-year institutions and then applied accordingly. I understand there are nuances in the model that differentiate between institutional mission in some ways, but that doesn't start at the input level. That's in the output side.
That's a valid one. Thank you.
That's correct. If you're measuring mission related sectors, research versus comprehensive versus. But I could even throw HBCU and as another mission related area, right? And then KCTCS. Yeah, it is a 4-year sector that you're producing outcomes on. In that case, we consider it a 4-year versus a 2-year sector.
And as you know, President McFadden, that there are differences in cost in terms of faculty and staff at our research institutions versus our comprehensives. Our research institutions produce a much higher proportion of master's degrees and doctoral degrees, which are higher cost degrees. Our research institutions have a much stronger research mission, if you will, and that's not recognized in the model. And that's why there's a differentiation between the comprehensive institutions and their funding level per FTE and the research institutions and their funding level per FTE. And you'll see that in just about every state. The Research One institutions are funded at a higher level than the comprehensive.
Can I ask for a clarifying point? Bill, you have it here on the footnote, but I think it's important because people overlook that. That these per FTE numbers include the general performance funding plus the performance funding distribution.
That's correct.
So there's some that are doing well with performance funding. And you're saying, oh, we're about equal. It's because of the performance funding. It's not because of the general appropriation.
No, that's a good point.
I think in looking at your 11 metrics, put it in further context. Something I think you sent out subsequent to this. Out of those 11 metrics overall, the percentage change, 8 of the 11 are decreases. Okay, so what you're measuring, competing against yourself, is how much less your decrease was
That's right.
in the sector. The other peculiarity I'll point out in this, and I think it's a strength in the different components, given mission and so forth. Those 11 metrics measure a lot of things. So at the University of Kentucky, although our entering classes are much bigger, you look at our total enrollment, it's been flat. So why is that? Because we moved our 4-year graduation rate by 23 percentage points. We moved the 6-year graduation rate and the 5-year now by 10%. So people get through quick. So on one hand, our overall enrollment is less, but we get rewarded in other parts of the. So I think, it has its intricacies and all, but it has good traffic lights about what levers you should pull along.
And I think it's important, I said this earlier, and we'll get to it a little bit later, you can skip over it, then, Bill. But I think there's other points that you need to understand about performance funding, the model versus the outputs that we're having. We're now Kentucky, I mentioned earlier, number 2 in the nation in completion. Our graduation rates are more all our 4-year institutions at 80%. KSU is getting close. Eli's graduation rate and so on up more. We are closing gaps for URM faster, right? I mean, there's some output that are huge. We're now at instead of a 6-year, graduation rate, our average is 4.1. And I keep on going forever at the big outputs that's happened within the last 5 or 6 years that are significant. So it is important that we have more than just one metric to look at when we're measuring outcomes or performance that where we need to go. So if you look at the model, where are some issues? Low income, as an example, right? John mentioned earlier the idea, we have a low 50+ year participation rate in work. So adult learners play an important part. And I keep on going forever with that conversation. But if you look at the analysis 10 years out, we're going to need more certificates, we're going to need more 4-year degrees, we're going to need more graduate degrees to keep Kentucky where Kentucky is currently at, but actually moving it forward in the future. So if you look at these things as a whole, you have to look at enrollment, not just as you're entering freshman, you look at also how well you're doing in graduating people. You can actually be hurting yourself in some degree by being efficient and effective. If you want to look at it purely from just a, one viewpoint, right? So that's why it's important that it stays holistic.
I think too, I'd add those numbers shifts in the last couple of years do have a COVID
That's right.
factor in them.
And once again,
That's why
Kentucky is
everyone-
one of the 2 states that have actually rebounded enrollment from COVID. That's why I get to make a speech about it nationally. We're one of very few, and I think it's due heavily to our dual credit, heavily to what you all been able to do with K-12 and whatnot.
Okay, go ahead and move on, Sean. We're going to provide you with just a quick update on the biennial budget development process. We're going to focus primarily on the operating funds components because those have some implications for the work of this secondary education work group. This is sort of a summary slide of where we are currently. President Thompson has been working diligently with the other campus presidents in this room. We believe we have some consensus around what the council may include in its biennial budget recommendation this coming October. And I'll just walk you through this quickly. We start with the beginning base, which is the 2023-24 net general fund. And as you can see in the footnote at the bottom, that's each institution's regular general fund minus debt service. So that includes mandated programs. It also includes the $97.3 million that's currently in the post-secondary education performance fund. So that's the beginning base. We have some base adjustments there, some KDRS subsidy reductions. But the thing I want you to focus on are those additional budget requests. We've got an inflation adjustment request at $54.7 million each year of the biennium. An earned performance funds request at $48.7 million each year of the biennium. And then a recommended increase in the performance fund of 22.7. The land grant program funding for KSU is still in process, so that's to be determined. But overall, at this point, if you look at those 2 rows at the bottom, we're talking roughly a request of 120 million additional new dollars, or around a 12% increase. In terms of the increase in the current year, the state budget for the 2024 biennial budget, we had about a 9.7, 9.8% increase. So 12% is a little above that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. We think it's an aggressive ask, but it's it's describing the resources that our campuses need to continue to make progress in terms of post-secondary outcomes. In terms of features of the inflation adjustment request, again, is 54.7 million each year. That represents an across the board 6% increase at each institution. In terms of how that will be treated within the performance funding model, we're going to recommend that those funds be excluded from the allocable resources run through the funding model. If authorized, these funds will help institutions offset some of the largest increases in inflation that we've seen in 2 decades. In 2021-22, the higher education price index went up by 5.2%. That's the highest single year increase in 2 decades. On average, it's going up about 3.1% per year. These funds will help the council and campus officials keep tuition increases to a minimum, which will help with affordability and access of Kentucky students.
Would that 6% be added to the base?
I'm sorry, what?
Would the 6% increase be added to the base of each institution?
Well, it's an additional budget request, so you can't add it to the base until you get to the next thing.
But that's my question. Is it the ask that it be added to the base?
Yes, we're asking that it be appropriated directly to each institution and treated like a mandated program. So those dollars will not run through the performance funding model.
And what has happened, I don't know if the slides in here or not, you think I would, I looked at them all last night again. But what we've been able to do is mitigate tuition, keep it really low, and they haven't been able to keep up with inflation in that regard. Thus, there's been faculty raises that are low or a variety of other things. Also, there'll be a slide, if you haven't seen it, we'll give it to you. The amount of institutional funds now that our institutions are given outweigh both the federal and state funds to each of the students that gets those funds. So this is going to trying to get a little bit of an inflationary base where they can operate from a baseline perspective too.
This table shows the allocation of a hypothetical inflation adjustment request for each year of the upcoming biennium. That first column is the 2023-24 net general fund appropriation of each institution. Again, the net general fund is each institution's regular appropriation minus debt service. That second column, we're applying that inflation adjustment percentage of 6% across the board. And you can see those resulting allocations in the 2 columns to the right.
Bill,
Yes,
if you could just clarify for everyone how mandated programs are included in this and the amounts of those.
it's roughly 120 million in mandated programs. But about 4 or 5 years ago, the General Assembly started line item those mandated programs in the budget bill. And because those are line item and those are mandated public service and research programs, because those are line items in the budget bill, institutions have to use those funds for those restricted purposes for those particular programs. They cannot be used to educate students. That's why we back those dollars out of the allocable resources. Well, we actually back it out of the adjusted net general fund in order to calculate the allocable resources that we run through the performance funding model.
But your 6% includes the mandated program.
Yes, it does.
So,
And when there's a budget cut, as you know, State Budget Director Hicks, you generally take the net general fund and just apply an across the board percentage cuts. So you cut the mandated programs when there are cuts. So this is a request for an across the board increase, but it does include mandated programs. On next slide, Sean. In terms of the impact of the inflation adjustment request on distributions, it should have no impact on the performance distributions because we're going to request, and hopefully the General Assembly, if they choose to authorize these funds, will exclude these dollars from the performance funding model. In terms of implications for this working group, I think everyone here remembers that over the past couple of meetings, several universities were proposing to change the funding model So that a portion of the performance funds would be carved out. You know, one institution suggested 1/3 of the 97 million be carved out, so that every year those dollars would be distributed just across the board to the base. And so, to the extent that we're requesting base funding outside of the funding model through the biennial budget development process, we feel like the need to modify the model to provide a base increase is alleviated. So we think we're addressing the base increase as part of our biennial budget request, and so there's no need to make a change in the funding model to accomplish that. Next slide, Sean. In terms of the earned performance funds request, we're going to ask for an additional appropriations of 48.7 million each year of the biennium. It will be allocated among institutions by multiplying their earned 2023-24 performance funds by 50%. We're going to ask that these be requested on a recurring basis, and they will be included in the allocable resources run through the funding model. If authorized, these funds will help cover increased operating costs at institutions that produce more outcomes relative to their peers over the last 3 or 4 years. In terms of the allocation, this table that Sean's about to show you next. This table shows the allocation of those hypothetical earned performance funds for fiscal years 24-25. The first column of numbers is the final 2023-24 performance fund distribution. You can see it totals $97.3 million. You can see the earned funds percentage in the second column, 50%. And we're multiplying that 50% times those earned funds in 2023-24. And then you can see the proposed allocations in those two columns on the right. I will point out that institutions, Moorhead and KSU specifically, that did not receive a distribution from the performance fund in 2023-24 will not receive an allocation under the council's proposed recommendation for the earned performance fund.
You know, if you state that that's included in the model, included in the performance final model.
Right.
Right, so they're right. Why would you show an allocation by institution when you don't know what that would be yet?
It would be appropriated to the institution. Right. It would be put through the model.
Yeah, it would be appropriated directly to each institution. It's an additional budget request that we're asking for each year of the upcoming biennium. Those dollars are not going to be distributed using the performance.
All right, you said included in the model, and I took that to mean distributed by the model.
No, the dollars will be included in the model.
That doesn't make sense.
In the adjusted net general fund.
Well, that doesn't make sense. Is it distributed in the model?
The model distributes the 97.3.
Is this, you're talking about baselining an amount here, right? If I got that right?
This is a base increase.
Yeah, this is a base increase.
Yes,
So I mean, just saying, so commentary about the model is not applicable. This is just another base. It's
well,
based-
but the base increase.
And I understand the method of allocation. I understand
Yeah.
that. But I wanted to understand that this is not in the model. This used the model for the distribution of the current year's budget to determine how much each institution.
That's correct. We're using the distribution from the current year
Okay.
to determine the allocation. But if the General Assembly chooses to authorize those funds, those will be added to the adjusted net general fund of each institution, and then it will have an impact on the distribution of the model. And that's the question that you have on the next page.
So Bill, if I could pause you for just a moment, Director Hicks creates an opportunity for me to piggyback off his question. Back up to slide, what I have is 13 in my printed copy. And maybe it's, yes, that's it. The last bullet touches on this same thing, I think, doesn't it? That last bullet.
Yeah,
So again, we're having a conversation about terms, words, and semantics. Walk me through what that bullet says and what it means.
the last bullet on this slide.
Yes.
What we're saying is, because several institutions have been arguing, let's change the model. So that every year when we run the model to distribute, let's just say it was 97.3 million for the next 10 years. When we run the model to distribute that 97 million, let's carve out a third of it and let's distribute it, not based on outcomes produced, but just on across the board base increase. And then let's distribute the other 2/3 using the funding model. What we're saying is we can address a base funding increase outside the funding. We can request an additional budget request from the governor and the General Assembly. And if those funds are authorized, you've got your base funding request or your base funding increase institutions. So we don't need to change the performance funding model to try to give you a base increase. So that's what that last bullet is basically saying.
And you want to juxtapose that to the 50% coming from the earned distribution. Am I correct?
No, I think Bill is clearly saying what that bullet says. The position that I'm in is a bit of a perplexing position because I have had to defend, rightly so, the integrity of the model and performance funding and us not doing anything around or outside. I have a sense that when my colleagues get this proposal, and I'm not taking the final position, I'm just simply making a statement that I'm suspecting everyone in the room knows that I will be making. This is not going to be a pure performance funding model anymore. Am I wrong?
It will be if you go with the inflationary increase, it stays a pure performance funding model. What we're saying on the base increase of 6% is let's try to adjust needs that become reoccurring that they currently have. That would create an opportunity for people to really be able to give their faculty raises and so on. But the model stays pure in that
But
regard.
I understand what Senator Gibbons is saying. He's saying that in the past, or at least over the past 4 or 5 years, all new dollars have run through the performance funding model. Now we're saying, let's don't run all new dollars through the performance funding model. Let's take 54.7 million, give a base increase outside the performance funding model and run those dollars or count those dollars in the performance funding model.
I got what he's saying, but
Yeah.
that doesn't hurt the integrity of the model.
No, and that doesn't require any change to the model, which that is actually, from my perspective, a good thing. But our institutions have been fairly adamant. They need base increase funding to offset these historically high inflationary cost adjustments. And we can't depend on the model to provide every institution that base increase. And so as a group of presidents working with President Thompson, they've determined that this is the best course of action, and it's a course of action that they can all get on board with and support, provided in addition to the adjustment request, there's some earned funds put to the base as well, because it's a package deal, so to speak.
But it's really maybe not, I don't want to use words like that because maybe not, because we're here to try to figure out all these things. And I want to be clear about what I've been told by the presidents. Presidents, you tell me if I'm wrong here. One of the things that they're all struggling, trying to figure out how to get dollars without increasing tuition that I've been fairly adamant about not doing, in order to pay their folks some of the needs that they have, because they've got no inflationary dollars, because no money goes to the base whatsoever, so they can't even make a budget. So the 6% that we're asking is basically about 50% of the inflationary need. Is that correct, Bill? Don't let me use numbers that I'm wrong.
We're talking about over 2 years.
Yeah.
If you got a 5.2% increase in 1 year and then a 3.1% increase in the next year, that's, an 8.3% increase over 2.
And I would kind of just piggyback on that, Dr. Thompson, yes, salaries are an issue. Utilities are an issue. Contract services are, just like we all see in our own home. So it's not just one particular inflationary aspect, combined with a commitment from everyone around this group to keep tuition as low as possible and try not to pass that cost on to the students to keep affordability top.
So let me also say, thanks for letting me walk in the room late and engage in conversation. I do ask for your forgiveness, all of you, for being late, but I have such respect for your time. So please forgive me for that. Thank you for letting me jump back in with one more follow-up if I can.
Absolutely.
Please. So on a separate but related conversation. Bill, when I try to put the slides together and follow the flow of them, because that's what my colleagues are gonna come to me and ask, and your colleagues are gonna come to you and ask is how does the money flow? So we have in that performance pool, based on slide 4, almost $76 million. Correct?
Did you say 76 million? 97?
For the universe.
No,
4 years. Oh, yeah, for the university, it's 70 million. That's correct. 22 million for KCTCS.
Yeah, for purposes of the slides we're working with right
Right,
now,
right.
75.8.
That's correct. That's correct.
So that 76 is in the pool. Everyone's frozen. They're not gonna fall below. We got the stop loss that we negotiated the last time we had these conversations. That pool of funds for the 4 years rolls forward and forward and forward and forward. Correct?
Right.
And forward and forward. So if it's rolling forward, we've got 76 there. Take me then to the slide that you have on 10, which has the 6% and the earned performance funds. Where is the 76
On which slide?
on slide 10? I see the 48, that's a part of that, I think, isn't it?
On slide 10? Yeah, go back to this slide. Yeah, the 97 million is part of that 2023-24 net general fund base.
For
So is it for purposes of the performance calculation for 24-25 is the 97, the 97 to 76, or whatever number we're going to use, is also going to flow through the performance calculation or not?
No,
You're saying no, and some are saying yes.
The 97 and the 22. Which is on top of the 97, so 119 million roughly
120.
would be the request for the performance fund.
That's right. Which 97 of that would be recurring.
It's already in there.
It's already
That's-
there.
Okay.
Bill,
We're asking for 22 more million.
let's see if I can wrap this up in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please do.
The 6% inflation is a $54.7 million cost. The 50% allocation is 48.6. And you want to put an additional 22.7 on top of the 97.3. So you're going to ask the General Assembly for an additional 126 million per year.
Yeah, 121 million
Yeah,
in the first year and 119 in the second.
my number, we're close. So that's going to be the ask based on this
Yeah,
recommendation.
basically a 12% increase on the base.
And so the earned performance funds, Bill, let me see if I get this right. Is part of what the formula is referred to as allocable resources.
Yes,
Right, allocable resources is kind of the starting point for the formula. Right, whereas 54 million wouldn't be in the allocable.
that's right. That was the excluded from the allocable resources.
And so allocable resources is a phrase we use to determine with each of the 11 metrics, what share is each institution's of that metric. That's right. Do you convert that allocable resources into 11 pots, 11 columns of numbers? And then that you add it back up, right? And say now with the formula, the allocable resources per institution is the sum of those 11.
Correct.
And, I'll try to make it in layperson's terms that I can understand because I'm not nearly smart as Bill and Sean. What we're asking for is a 6% across the board. That's not going to be a part of performance funding nor ran through performance funding. You will have, if we get the full funding that we're asking for in performance funding, we'll have 122 million in that pot, right, Bill?
Not in the performance fund?
Yeah.
120.
Well, 120, I'm sorry, not 122. Yeah, 120. And that's where those allocable resources take place, except for the 54 million if it goes to waste. Am I correct?
Right. And no,
I like Secretary Hicks,
yeah, just to move this along.
paraphrase better.
Yeah, you did an excellent job, State Budget Director. And you had emailed Sean and me a question, I believe about 2 days ago about this first bullet on this slide. If requested funding is authorized, and we're talking about the earned performance funds, the university would be brought closer to funding parity, which will allow more institutions to fully participate in the funding distributions going forward. You had asked us to provide an explanation of that. And what we handed out as a separate handout, that scenario number 6, State Budget Director Hicks, you should have in front of you. That first column of numbers on the upper half of the page is showing the final 23-24 distribution. That second column of numbers is showing what the distribution would look like if the earned funds had been added, if the General Assembly authorizes that funding and it gets added to the formula base of institutions that earn those funds. And as you can see, it looks like, oh, well, UK is going to receive $3.2 million less. Northern is going to receive $2.4 million less. But what you got to keep in mind is it that way?
That answers it.
I want to go back. What you got to keep in mind is that UK is picking up, if those funds were authorized to 48.7 million, they're picking up 16.7 million. That's going to be added to their formula base, and Northern will be picking up 6.3 million that would be added to their formula base. That formula base is what's used to help calculate the allocable resources that run through the model. When you get to the end of the process, it only informs how you distribute that 97 million or that 120 million. But what this is going to do, if those earned funds are authorized and added to the formula base, it's going to allow institutions like Eastern picking up an additional $2.4 million, Murray an additional $1 million, Western an additional $1.6 million, and even Moorhead. It would eliminate their hold harmless in its entirety, and they would pick up close to 600,000 additional dollars if there were no changes in performance outcomes or operational support outcomes. So that's what we meant by it moves the institutions toward funding parity, because you've added some of those dollars to the base that are going to be included in the model. And it was informed by who earned the performance funds in the current year. And so that moves the institutions toward that funding parity, so that the next time you run the model, it's going to proportionately benefit institutions other than just UK or Northern. But UK and Northern are benefiting because they're getting some of those earned dollars added to their base. So I'm trying to convince the president that everybody benefits.
Bill, what you're saying is you just said funding parity. In the slide here, you use the term that we've used at the beginning of the discussion on performance funds.
That's right.
So what you're saying is that by adding that 48.7 million to the allocable resources, it will get each university closer to equal.
That's right. And so the next time you run the model of other institutions, besides the two that, seem to routinely be either performing better or have historical funding disparities, in Northern's case, other institutions, primarily comprehensives, Eastern, Moorhead, Western, Murray, they're going to receive proportionately more dollars, or at least have the opportunity to receive proportionately more dollars, because you are now closer to equilibrium.
But they can't do it unless they perform. Let's be clear, because
That's
it
right.
still fits in the model.
And I'm gonna get through this last one quickly. We've already talked about it. We're requesting an additional 22.7 million each year added to the 97 million already in the performance fund, 120 million. All of 100% of those funds would be allocated to the performance fund. Hang on, Sean. Yeah, if that requested funding is authorized, every university would have an increased opportunity to increase their distribution or reduce their hold harmless. I didn't include the scenario, but I've run it to see what if you had 120 million distributed using the funding model, and more money cures a whole host of bills. Everybody gets more money if there's more money to distribute, or they reduce their hold harmless.
And you're going to hear me saying a little bit, for those who haven't heard already, I'm be making an argument for another way of reducing the whole harmless in addition.
We've got 5 public university funding model scenarios we want to share with you quickly. These were either proposed by CPE staff or campus officials. You can see those 5 listed there, and the first one up is increase the low-income degree premium, and I'm gonna let Sean take it from here.
As you all know, there are premiums for degrees earned, STEM plus H degrees, URM degrees, low income student bachelor degrees. There's been strong growth in STEM plus H and URM degrees awarded, but awards to low income students have lagged behind since from 2014 to 2021. There was actually a decrease in low income bachelor's degrees awarded, and several stakeholders, UK, U of L, KCTCS, CPE, expressed interest in a low income degree premium increase. Currently, the subsidy for STEM plus H degrees is about $3,700. URM degrees about $6,000. Low income degrees is about $1,600. So we hope that a larger subsidy will provide additional incentive for institutions to enroll, retain, graduate low income students. So an increase in the allocation percentage for the low income pool from 3% to 8% is the scenario that we developed for today. So that the increase of 5% of that pool, we are proposing.
And that would result in a larger subsidy at the level of just over 4,200. So it more than doubles the premium for low income degree produced.
That necessitates decreasing a pool by 5%. And if this scenario shows a decrease in the credit hours earned pool from 35% to 30%. And of course, there are no other changes presented.
And I wanna make a comment on that from a statewide perspective, and that's what I'm here at the table representing. We're gonna have to get more low income students to the finish line. We have to. I mean, if we're gonna actually increase our economic output and not cost us money. So that's one of the reasons why I'm pushing heavily toward this. We've got to do a better job in that particular area. We've already seen the impact of what performance funding can do in certain areas. My argument now, we have to focus on this. I'm sorry.
Let me add, hypothetically, if we were to do this, it would go into effect in the subsequent year. Meaning, because this is a degree metric, right? So it hits the pipeline that's already in. With the idea that over time, the recruitment side, 4 years later, right now, would be higher as well.
Well, that's right. I mean, a part of it has to be, you said it well, it has to be recruitment, but also it's going to take a lot more wraparound services. I hate to go into this great detail. One of the reasons why I'm arguing heavily for the inflationary dollars. You know, Moorhead just walked out of the room. I was going to use him as an example. He's KSU. I mean, it takes a lot more resources to educate someone that may not represent the Tipton, have the kind of background coming into the higher ed system. They're going to need more wraparound services, to be honest with you. And that's one of the reasons my argument is for inflationary dollars, and the other is to increase this percentage. Because it's, once again, it directly affects the economic output.
This chart here shows the impact of the change that we just discussed. So increasing low income from 3% to 8%, decreasing degree earned credit hours from 35% to 30%. Bill pointed out to me just now that 35% is by far the largest category of allocation, at over about $210 million in the model for earned credit hours. But the impact would shift funds from UK and NKU and WKU to U of L, Eastern, and Murray, and it would reduce the hold harmless allocations at KSU by $65,000 and Moorhead State University by $321,000.
Excuse me, real quickly, on the previous slide, when you have the amounts for each of these 3 categories, if someone is STEM and low income, are those additive in a way?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And they're added to about a $2,100 or $2,200 subsidy per degree for total bachelor's degrees. So if it's just a URM student, you essentially get,
$2,200.
yeah, 6,000 plus 2,200, $8,200 subsidy.
I'd ask to use the word incentive.
If it's,
And I agree, incentive,
I'm sorry, say that again.
incentive, not
Incentive, not a subsidy.
Okay, incentive funding, thank you.
So Bill, in this low income, degree premium, it's really the allocation and percentage of funds to that activity that we're reallocating. We're reducing the credit hour, which is the lion's share of distribution by 5, and we're adding that 5 to the low income.
Correct.
However, there's a weighting factor that is also applied to the low income activity that is disproportionate between the regional institution and the research institutions. But as a percentage of service, I don't know if we looked at this, are our regional institutions serving a higher preponderance of low income students than our research institutions? And if so,
Some of them are.
does that weighting create a chilling effect on rewarding this performance outcome we're trying to incentivize?
I don't know the answer to that question. What I can tell you is, as I said in President's only meeting, KSU has the largest proportion of URM students, either the largest or the second largest proportion of low-income students served. Morehead, either first or second in terms of proportion of low-income students served. But if you look at the number of low-income students served, research institutions serve a much larger number of low-income students. So all of our institutions serve low-income students. But this change, all else being equal, if you were only changing the low-income metric itself, institutions like KSU and Morehead should benefit from that.
Yeah, I guess
But you're also changing at the same time, the earned credit hour component, because you got to take the 5% from somewhere.
I think the challenge is, but if you're serving a higher percentage of your total student body, being URM or low income, the demands on those student services and those other things perhaps become more impactful at those institutions and are not absorbed. And the weighting between what the regionals have and what the research institutions have, the most disproportionate ratio between the two is in the low income student population. I think at a 2.35 weighting for the research and a 1.0 for the reader. So I think that needs a little bit of attention as we try to solve this problem.
Noted, sir. We'll take a look at that.
Well, and also the easiest way I think to look at that is Pell grants on each campus, the percentage. I mean, it's some public data. So, as you know.
And let me be clear, what we're talking about here is within the existing model. What we're recognizing, what we can move around in the model that has a bigger output for the state need. You're right, I mean, to the weights become another piece of the company.
In order to serve them more at our campuses, we're going to need more resources. And I think that if there's a finite amount in the pool, the weighting will, again, if it's for the low income purpose, I think we need to take a hard look at that as a percentage. Our student bodies are more low income than perhaps the research institution population, or maybe they're not.
Well, let me say this, as someone who's trying to rush to get us on the same page on the model. Is this something you want to run for next time? Can we run that? Is this something y'all want to run? Because I want to get to next time, very little, I said this before you came in, sorry. The idea that we need to be solidifying all of these things sooner rather than later, because these guys have put a lot on their plates to look at.
Dr. Thompson, if your question is running a scenario around low income and increasing it 3 to 8%, is that your question?
No, we have that already,
Yeah.
about whether or not you look at the differentials in weighting for.
Let me just clarify. I think what you're proposing is the same weighting, research sector, comprehensive sector, and then run the low income and see what that output.
Because we're talking about a low income undergraduate student, and I think that perhaps if we want to put resources to the low income students, we may need to level the playing field for that specific population for all of us.
So Dr. Tom, your assertion earlier, other is correct. Morehead State with 53 to 55% low income. We have a larger percentage of our total student body classified as low income and sometimes extremely low income. And less students who can afford that. So we're spreading our valuable resources into this group, taking away essentially from the whole. I would argue on behalf of Morehead State that we go far and above from 3 to 8%. Is shown on the second page, page 2025, because clearly statewide, not just in the region that I represent, but clearly statewide, we've all struggled in the low income area. If the whole state is struggling with low income, according to CE data, why not boost that to 10 or 12?
Well, here,
If this model is going to be in place for the next three to 6 years before review again.
the bill has talked to CEOs, as we can't even, if you're asking Aaron Thompson, you know, I would argue, yes, I'm with you. I mean,
10 or 12.
personally, because I know,
Among all of us.
yeah, I know what it takes to actually give those wraparound services. Let me pick on you for 1 minute.
Yeah.
Here in front of people, you know, you not receiving any funding in the past really has created a situation where you don't have nearly the student success infrastructure that I'm not saying you're not working hard. That's not my point. But a part of it takes more money to create that. And the more you have that you need, low income, first generation, a lot of those other elements that we care about. It takes a lot of those wraparound services to make it happen. And that's the argument that you're making. I would agree that we can look at increase the percentage, but I would want this group because I like to get us all on the same page if we can. So know what that is.
To your point, those wraparound services are much more expensive to the population of low income students generally than it is to other segments of our student population. We need more advisors, we need more retention specialists, we need more student affairs support, we need more tutoring, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And with 53 to 55% of our campus representing that population and money being withdrawn from Morehead, there's no way to win.
Well,
So that's why my argument to increase the low income from 3 to 8 should go 3 to 10 or 12.
Just let me throw out some numbers just to provide them to this group. The low income bachelor's degree production pool, the size in 2023-24, 17.9 million. Like going from 5% to 8%, you're bumping that up to 47.6 million. So you're adding another $30 million to that pool. Something
You're adding it to the pool, but the institutions that need it, KSU and Morehead, have no opportunity to win it.
well, there's other opportunities.
well, that's why we're arguing for a baseline increase too, by the way.
You're adding it to the pool.
That's why we're
The
talking
pool
about the
does
small
that.
school adjustment as well.
Without the small school adjustment, KSU and Morehead, there might be more money in the pool, but we're not going to win it.
But I would imagine, Bill, that if the weightings were reallocated, there would be a greater distribution of funds in here if your student body is 50.
Oh, there would be a big impact.
Yeah.
Well,
And it would be
it would be from the research.
it would be from UK U of L to
Exactly.
the comprehensive sector. And I don't think you're gonna get agreement on that, but I'll be happy to run the scenario. Just addressing what your comments, President Morgan, another way to think about it, if this group is interested. You can add an additional weighting within the earned credit hour component to reward earned credit hours by low income students. And that is the single largest pool. As of 23-24, as Sean said, it's close to 210 million. Instead of 78.6 million. So that would have the kind of impact that I think you're looking for.
Not only the institution I represent, our whole state clearly, statewide data shows we've not done a good job statewide, or is building up a job statewide in the low income area. So I think we ought to double down
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think we all have a tremendous responsibility in this category, no matter if it's 3 to 8 or 8, 10, 12, whatever the number is. Personally, I believe, making an educated guess also, based on everything I read and what I see personally in our institution, Western Kentucky, is we're serving low income students, but not to the level we should be.
That's
And I think
exactly.
it's impacting college going rates. I think this area is an area that would help us solve college going rates better than anything else we're talking about. Or it could help us move. We've got to address that issue in Kentucky.
I'll say this, it may sound personal, but I promise you I'm being professional with it. I'm from Clay County, Kentucky. When I look at eastern and southeastern Kentucky, when I look at it regionally, out in your neck of the woods, this is one of the only ways that we can address this in the way the current model is set up. I mean, truly, because what you have, and Bob, I appreciate you saying that, and I didn't say it. It's not like you don't want to serve. It's just that we're not serving them to that degree, and the model is showing that.
We
So if you look at the outcomes,
We've got to get them in our
so
institution.
however we get there, David, you know, and Jay, I think we have to not. You know, I say this, Senator Givens, Secretary Hicks, and Representative Tipton. I mean, we've got to figure out how to not leave these folks behind if we have an opportunity to not leave them behind. So a part of what we put on the table, we'll argue vehemently for it, and y'all could legislate and say the heck with it, I guess. But we're gonna have to figure out, because to me, this could be one of the biggest impacts on really preparing students who are the most disenfranchised to actually get the outcomes we need for the state.
Let me add a caveat at the end of your statement, though. Without slowing the advancement toward our goal of 60 by 30.
That's correct.
If we,
That's correct.
and oftentimes to make a point, I'll use extreme examples. Totally shut down the credit hours earned pool and do it all to low income. I'm being facetious, but understand me on that. We would shift rapidly the focus of the institutions to who they're going to bring to their campuses at the expense of us moving on the plane that we're moving on towards 60 by 30. So there's got to be a both sides to the question.
Now, your point is well taken. I know we're not getting through your PowerPoint slide reel, but some I'm sure you can skip over. Because good change is incremental change. I can show you in all kinds of organizational analysis is your point. Because there's some other things that we're moving that we don't want to have an impact on as we're moving this, right?
Adversely impacted.
Adversely impact. So I think that's really, and that's what we've talked about. You're going to see some data that says some of the credit hour generation 30 and 60 are not getting us a lot of return on investment. Whereas the 60 to 9 is really giving us some return. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
You know, so there are some things that we can shift around if we choose to that could possibly have a bigger impact. And the model hasn't been in play long enough, and that's what y'all charged us to do last time in this go around, to show some of the tweaking we can do to get to that, because we have, proud to say, we're at 54 point something percent toward our 60% goal. And I'm proud of that. We don't want to slow that down, but we want to increase it.
So I want to commend the working group. You jumped right into the discussion without even waiting for the discussion question. So some of you had suggested maybe we ought to bump the 8% up to 13%. I think you're on board with us maybe running a scenario that adds a little more weight within the earned credit hour component, because that's going to give you the most bang for the buck. So we'll do that. Let's move on to the next one.
The adult learner metric model does not currently contain a metric that rewards enrollment, retention, or completion of adult learners. Integral to achieving our 60 by 30 attainment goal to include adult learners. Stakeholders have proposed that we consider a metric, and we have come up with a scenario that adds an adult learner premium to the model by counting credit hours earned by resident undergraduate students 25 to 64. There's no other change in student success or operational support data. And here is the resulting
The distribution.
distribution. You can see that this table shows the shift of funds from UK and WKU to University of Louisville, EKU, Murray, and Northern. The biggest gains are to NKU and EKU. And the biggest losses are from WKU and University of Kentucky. And to be clear, the adult learner hours are added to the existing hours that are already in the model that already include adult learners. They're just,
So it's a premium.
so it's a premium. And then these hours are, of course, they're weighted by course level and discipline. And we're only talking about undergraduate hours.
And just to give you some sense of scale, the total number of credit hours earned by adult learners is about 6% of the total credit hours. So it's a very low percentage of the total credit hour pool.
And we've lost 60, I mean, like 60 university and.
So I know this-
About 60,000 adult learners out of the lot, so.
So I know this doesn't seem like it's moving a lot of dollars around, which maybe is a good thing, given what Senator Gibbons was saying about doing things incrementally. But it's because that percentage is so low.
This is equitable in my mind. We've got to get something started here. We've got too many, our workforce participation rate is low. We're gonna have to figure out how to use every resource we have to increase the workforce participation rate. This goes to that as well as the low income in the URM. To be honest with you, it goes directly to that more than probably any other categorical area.
To build a perspective, Dr. Thompson, this is a brand new component to the model.
But it's allocation within the model, so it's not changing.
And President Morgan, this is the scenario that I was talking about that we could use for low income.
This is the
Just adding premium to that current credit hour.
Even though because we're a traditionally based low income university, the adult learner population would increase our whole arm significantly.
Yeah, 450,000.
If the weight is 1.0, what's that compared to? What are other weights in that?
Non-residents are weighted at 0.5, and then all other credit hours are weighted at 1. But as Sean said, adult credit hours are already in the total. And so this is on top of that. It's almost like giving it a weighting.
It kind of creates a behavioral change toward adult. Yeah.
So is the motivation for the change? I'll direct it to you and then you can shift the brakes to go. Is it a gut feel that you have, or do we have some significantly statistical number that says our 6% relative to other universities and other states is significantly lower? Help me to know what's driving us. And I'm not saying I oppose it at all. I'm just saying.
We have data. Lee, do you have that adult learner comparative data with you right now?
No, sir, I sure don't.
Lee, I trust you so much. Listen, I trust you so much. All you have to do is say, David, it's real. And so, are we an outlier? Is that what's going on here specific to who?
I'll have to get back to you with data.
Okay.
Well, let me tell you what, from a national scene, I thought Lee would help me out there, but she left me to answer myself. Now, from a standpoint, what we know, we look at the prediction of our 60 by 30, we have a number that says we have to get X amount more adults in the pipeline to reach that 60%. So we have it directly compared to us in looking at where we're needing to go. And right now, we're not gaining in that number, we're losing in that number.
I think what we do know is we have a low education. And that reflects on our adult population. So we know we have a lower educated and skilled adult population that we certainly have room and a need to grow. And so I think from President Thompson's perspective, this performance funding model can be a powerful lever to increase that that educational attainment level, and particularly reskill adults that we really want to get back in the workforce and performing at a higher level.
And it also correlates, once again, it's me pushing this, I get it, and some others around the table maybe, but it's me pushing it. Also, it creates an opportunity for us to create a larger relationship with our employees. And some of the things that we're doing, especially around areas of healthcare, reskilling people, getting employees put their skin in the game like we're doing HB 200. So a part of this is also the closest proxy I have with a workforce metric that we're not introducing this time now. Because the workforce is consisting of those people that are in that number.
When
So,
you see other states like Tennessee that have jumped in and Michigan both meet to really target this adult population through student financial aid programs in particular. In some states in their performance funding models have targeted adults. So it's certainly not unprecedented, and these states recognize that, this is a great lever for workforce.
They're also present. How much is this adult learner potential impacted by the number of adults who do not hold a high school diploma or equivalent degree?
you hit another nail on the head that this doesn't address. If you look at, let's take basic adult education, which is really slowed down. GEDs. What we know is for a while they got all the, what I call the cream of the GED crop, and now they're dealing with people with 6th, 7th grade education. They're trying to get it. So that number is really low. So it's a huge impact. We look at basic adult learners that can't get jobs, sustain jobs, and we look at a correlation with prisons and a variety of other things, it impacts it tremendously. So you have adult learners that we're talking about from our standpoint here, then you got the basic adult education folks that are not feeding into that adult learner pipeline. They're out there, they're not getting GEDs, they're not working in sustainable fields.
Let me add to that, because one of the reasons that's true is because we're graduating more high school students. Right, we're having a greater attainment of high school education.
That's
our age. So that does shrink the population of adults who don't have or who need. So one of the questions I would like to ask the institutions on this is some of the more prospective lower hanging fruit here is those who have college hours but didn't complete a degree.
That falls within that 600 level.
And so, I'm interested, like if I were sitting in your seat and I was getting more money for that, I would say, now what's my marketing technique? And and how do I get those to come back and finish? Because that takes less resources, takes less time, has more relationship to getting a better job.
I would say, Mr. Secretary, that we've had a lot of success in this space. But it's kind of it's two populations. It's one, the individual wants economic mobility. But two, that the employer wants to make an investment in employees because there's a retention aspect of that. So our relationship with our employers in our footprint and their willingness to do a tuition assistance or some kind of partnership has been substantially impacted here. The other population that has been impacted, I've heard us talk a lot about Kentucky being a destination for this population, are veterans. And those are the best for vets in the state. We've got over 1,800 veterans or veteran family members enrolled in EK. We're #1 in the state now. But those are two. There's and of course, there are VA benefits to support that. But there's a gap there. Second Chance Bell is going to help with some of those. But I do think that trying to create some to remove some financial barriers, whether it's through the employer, through a tax credit, through some kind of benefit, is critically important to engage that adult.
Well, and that's right. There's different pots of people here, and we just named 3 different pots. Your pot is this is no such thing as low hanging fruit, Mr. Secretary. Let me be careful how I say this. But some adults with no college that are underemployed, they're not adding to it, is really the low hanging fruit part of this also. And they fall in different categories. As someone who sells boards of big companies here in Kentucky, they are interested in creating a relationship with higher education. We have to build that out, right? And it takes wraparound services for adult learners that are totally different, whether they're veterans or not, than other population groups, once again. So I think every point that you all made is excellent. Someone's going to say something.
You just took my point there. There's much like the first generation students and the low income students, there's a cost associated. Very high consumers support service.
Yeah, so to Mr. Secretary's point about some college no degree in terms of completion, this is the only demographic metric that is on credit hours, not on graduates. And we might want to rethink, because we have Pell eligible graduates, we have HRM graduates, we have STEM graduates. This one is credit hours. And if we're looking at increased number of graduates to be able to target those that have some college degree, et cetera, that's when you get a much better ROI.
So what I'm hearing you say, back to something President Kaplan said a moment ago, there's no opportunity to add the condiments to this one. We can't layer, is that what I'm hearing her say?
So what I'm saying is
We can't score this 25 to 64 group, we can't score in the low income. They can't score in the underrepresented minority. They can't score, or can they? Help me to understand. They can score in all those, and then they can add to that this new further component.
Yes,
Okay,
but my point is, everything else is on graduates, which is the outcome variable we're looking for. This one being proposed in terms of adult learners is based on credit hours.
And we discussed both those options.
The discussion, and I want to give some explanation why we went with this one, because I'm okay with doing graduates too, by the way, very much okay. Is because so many of these are skill ups, of people coming back in to really work with employers to get certain other skills to increase their outputs, if you will, at the employer level. So many of those may not be getting that traditional
Degree.
You see what I'm saying? So I don't want to miss out on the increase in working with employers to get some of those skill ups at a UPS or at Blue Oval or at some of the others. What that may only need to come back. Now, we could create more micro credentials. We could create some more of those. But the reason why it's not, I'm okay with going with graduates also, but I do believe the biggest capture here is the increase in the credit hour generation.
It just means, I spent a few years in Michigan, and I got a Department of Commerce grant. We were looking at stop outs, adult stop outs to be able to do it. And at the time, Michigan had one of the highest percentages of some college no degree. And it was an effort to be able to pull them through, because they've purchased college credit hours, they've been involved, we could find them. To be able to pull them through the pipeline is really important. So it's just something that we might.
Well, that's right. And it serves, once again, we just mentioned about 5 populations of adult learners that we need to get engaged. And some of those will truly, veterans will want to get a degree, right? And some of those psychology no degrees, some of those. So I'm not saying that's not a proposal you shouldn't put on the table. I mean, my argument is that I think we're going to have to get this somehow into our model.
Dr. Thompson, there's also data out there to suggest, even with our technical students, so we're thinking KCTCS, that there's different percentages I've seen. The largest I've seen is 20% of those students have baccalaureate degrees before they ever come to us, because they have baccalaureate degrees in areas they cannot get high wage, high sustaining jobs. So they come to us and they go through, like I represent Ashland, we do welding 24 hours a day. We do welding classes. Some of those students have bachelor's degrees before they ever come to us. They just want a better, a better wage and a better, life for their families. And so that's what gets kind of complicated. But if you look at that nationally, that large of a percentage, they've got bachelor's degrees. They're just coming back to technical skills to pay.
And I know we need to get off on this cover than we need to, but along with that, Dr. Ferguson, this could enhance the opportunity for transfer.
That's right.
KCTCS to 4-year institution along those lines. Anyway.
In the interest of time, President Thompson, I know you want to get to the small school adjustment.
Yeah, I do.
Suggest we skip degree efficiency index and straight to.
Unless somebody wants to talk about the degree efficiency index.
I mean, we can pick
They're
that up.
working on the building, can you tell?
I mean, we can pick that up at our next meeting. And if people want to talk about that today, we can, but we've got KCTCS on the agenda as well. So we need to leave.
Let's talk about small school adjustment, which I think is probably the big elephant right now.
Yeah, I think most of the presidents in the room, certainly Senator Gibbons knows this. Small school adjustment is an amount deducted from the formula base. So that those funds can be excluded from the allocable resources run through the funding model. 6 years ago, the original working group had a lot of discussion about the small school adjustment. CPE staff had recommended a 15% small school adjustment. President Thompson was the interim president at Kentucky State University. He recommended that it be a 25% small school adjustment. And the working group reached consensus at a 10% adjustment. We've had several stakeholders that you see listed there that have asked that small school adjustment be increased specifically for KSU and Morehead State University. In terms of the rationale for that, you can see that first bullet, other than the first year that we call year zero, where KSU was excluded from the model. But beginning with that first full year of implementation, when KSU was included in the model, Kentucky State and Morehead have had negative hold harmless allocations and have not received any funding distributions since the model began. And CPE staff's stance on this is that a larger adjustment would promote equity and enhance the ability of KSU and Morehead to earn funding through improved performance. So in terms of the assumptions for this scenario, we increased the switch onto the next slide. We increased the small school adjustment at KSU and at Morehead. And as you can see, the distribution in that middle column for the increased small school adjustment is very similar to the final 2023-24 distribution. And so if you look at that dollar difference column, it does not cause any meaningful shifts in funds among campuses. What it does do is it reduces the hold harmless at KSU by 6.6 million. It reduces the hold harmless at Morehead State by 1.4 million. It levels the playing field, if you will, and gets those institutions up to the same starting line, and at least mathematically, in terms of the funding model, they would be at funding parity with the other 6 universities in the public university funding model. We've got some discussion questions there. Again, we feel like that this change will allow KSU and Morehead to compete more effectively in the model. And we would like to know if members of this body would support that change.
And I want to say quickly, we wholeheartedly support this change. It's something we probably should have done a long time ago. Simply because I've heard now from both sides of the General Assembly and from the governor's office, how do we this time get this to where, once again, Jay seems like a pick on you today, where Morehead doesn't come and say we can't participate, we're not getting any money, right? This allows, without harm to anyone, allows Morehead and KSU to really participate on their own flat model. And I think it's important that if we can put this to bed, I'd love it. If we can put all this to bed, I'd love it, but this is an opportunity for anybody to speak up against the board, I think.
Bill, so instead of increasing the percentage, you took this factor and added to the percentage to get to the number.
Well, we can take the actual.
Positive inverse.
Yes, the hold harmless allocation is a negative number. And it's a negative 6.6 million for KSU, around a negative 1.3 million for Morehead. And so we take the positive number and we deduct that from the allocable resources.
It wasn't increasing the percentage, it was that number to get where you get to equilibrium.
Right. In the comprehensive model, every comprehensive university has a $4.45 million small school adjustment. This would increase KSU's small school adjustment up over 11 million. They would get Morehead small school adjustment up over 6 million. And then mathematically, those dollars are deducted from the allocable resources. And so instantly the model says, hey, we're at equilibrium.
And they are small school.
And as I said in the president's only meeting, KSU serves the largest proportion of underrepresented minorities, either the first or second highest proportion of low income. Morehead, either first or second, and I apologize for not knowing this, who's second, of low income students. And so there are some unique challenges for those institutions to try to retain, progress those students and get them to the finish line. And all this does is get them to that funding parity, up to the starting line, if you will. If they don't improve their performance or not move forward, they won't get any additional dollars. The KSU could improve their performance every year for the next 10 years, but they are so far behind the starting line, they will never get any additional funding. We just think that's patently unfair.
And for the sake of KCPCS, I'd like to put the three gentlemen to my left on. I'd love to hear your response to this one. Not said before we get to KCPCS. No.
Yeah.
On this piece.
Let me just say mechanically, if I understand it right, this is, this is not very impactful to the rest of the institutions, because we're not adding a dollar to the appropriations. We're just reserving a higher value for those new institutions from the allocable resource. Right, and so, and they're very tiny impact. This guy, this, like you said, President Thompson, it kind of puts them at the starting line instead of behind the starting line.
That's exactly. Sure.
I'm gonna offer a limited comment solely because I sense that this is, from my understanding, this is an internal decision amongst the presidents more than it is gonna be taxpayers.
That's correct, because it doesn't change the model.
That's correct.
No,
That's
it is yes. I mean, but we still like to have, obviously, goals.
Silver lining is gonna be, we are stabilizing two very important institutions in the Commonwealth. If there's any cloud, I shouldn't say silver lining, the bright sunshine is we're stabilizing two vitally important institutions in the Commonwealth. If there is a small cloud, it's going to be those that are not being, and help me about this state. You've never been afraid to before, so don't be afraid to now. We have some institutions that are not going to be getting these funds because the pie is not changing among the comprehensives.
Well, they don't get those funds anyway.
Okay. Explain it.
It's a whole harmless, those are not distributable anyway, they don't get those funds anyway. That's why you see on here, there's very little impact to the institutions on the.
Because the value of that 7.9 million,
going forward.
which is the sum of KSU and Moreheads, is such a small percentage of $570 million. And so that's why the impact on the institutions is so small, because this change is affecting whatever 7.9 billion divided by 570 million is. Sure.
Yeah, and they will have some, but it's so minuscule that, I mean, it won't take millions of dollars from you.
But from a percentage standpoint for these two institutions, it has significant.
Significant impact. They can participate on their own base.
Yeah.
Versus if they participate and they win, it just goes to the whole harmless, they still get no money to do anything with. Does that make sense?
It does.
So Morehead and KSU keep falling behind, so you're asking student success, but you're not giving us any money, we're working our butts off, but we can't even build our base to build off of it. So, and that's the conversation I know Representative Kipling I've had with Senator West more than once, who called me up, and the governor has been very clear on this.
If the universities are willing to see on this, I see.
So again, send them in the right place. When we say the last bullet on slide 39, which is the slide with the funding model to the right half of it. The last bullet, but it does reduce the hold harmless by 39%. That's it. That's the one. No, go back.
Go back.
That's it. Last bullet, Bill, when we say it does reduce the hold harmless. Elaborate on that bullet some point. Okay, draw the picture again for David Gibbons.
Every time we run the model, since the very first year that all 8 universities were included in the model, KSU and Morehead have had whole promise allocations, which means given what they were producing, they already had sufficient funding, to address that, although I think our institution would disagree with that. So those hold harmless dollars remain in the base. They're not eligible to be redistributed because you got rid of the stop loss 3 years ago. You now have a funding floor 2021. So those dollars are in the base. By adding those dollars to the small school adjustment, those dollars are typically stay in the base at each of those institutions. But mathematically, you've now increased that small school adjustment, which gets deducted from the formula base in order to calculate the allocable resources that flow through the model. But now you're deducting over 11 million for KSU, over 6 million for Moorhead, and about 4.5 million for the other comprehensives. And the funding model is going to interpret that as, hey, everybody's at funding parity. And that's why it doesn't shift a lot of dollars around. Because all you're doing is you're taking the dollars out of the hold harmless allocation and you're saying, let's just add that to the small school adjustment.
That's right.
And it's being deducted from the model.
That the word reduce, and you went exactly where I thought you would go, and that helped me understand. Thank you.
President Thompson, in order to allow time for Brendan and KCTCS folks, I'm going to suggest that Sean and I send out those discussion questions for each of these 5 scenarios to work group members and allow them an opportunity to weigh in via email on whether they support something or would like a different scenario run or want to change or modify something.
That's right, and just to let y'all know, once again, 1,000 times said this, we want to get to the point of where we're solidifying this. So if there's consternation that things you can't live with or whatever, please send back, because pretty soon I think we're going to need to get this, I won't say out of the way, but we need to be getting to a point where we're focusing the most. KCTCS.
Good afternoon, everyone. I try to be patient with everybody's time. Just go over a little bit of the case TCS reporting funding model in its current state. Show a little bit of what's happened in the current year with the metrics and the distribution. We've gone through the process of looking at the model and reevaluating it with our college presidents and collected some feedback on it. We'll do a little review of what that feedback was and what the changes, the proposed changes would do to the model. This is the current model in for the current year in 23-24 and the comparison to the last year's model for 22-23. The current model, as we know, is based on metrics from the 21-22 academic year in comparison to the prior year before that, the COVID years. What we're seeing here is the fiscal year distribution of 23-24 versus the 22-23 data. Or 22-23 iteration, I'm sorry. The dollar differences, those in the green are colleges that increased in funding from the prior year. Of the 16 colleges, we had 12 that earned performance funding. 4 were above parity or above equilibrium and were held at that 41 base amount. Those are a couple of our Eastern Kentucky schools are in there. You can see that over on the right on their calculated distribution. What you're seeing here a little bit on that dollar difference in the middle column there in the green, and you can kind of see there was some changes from one year to the next and kind of put some emphasis on what our college presidents is concerned on getting recurring dollars and the need for performance funding to be rolled into the base the following year. A lot of this stuff, when it's in the performance funding pool, gets held in that pool, and it's hard for the colleges to use if they're not recurring dollars for any of those fixed cost increases or inflationary increases. This is a metric comparison. We'll go over a few of the metrics. These are credentials, weighted 3-year credentials. This is a 3-year average of the 16 community colleges. You can see the winners and losers there, or the performers. We had ones 6 colleges above the weighted average median for all 16 colleges. We'll also have URM credentials. We had a 6.7% increase from the 22-23 iteration to the 23-24 iteration. We had a number of colleges increase in that metric. These are all rolling in, and the weighted average credential was how much of the model? 10%, and the URM is currently at 2% of the model. This is just a progression metric. This is at the 15-hour threshold. These are the increases. We had a slight decrease from 22-23 to 23-24, with some changes. About half the colleges go up and half go down. And then this is weighted course completion, which is the largest portion of the model. This is a comparison of weighted credit hours from 2021 to 21-22. Again, just the increases and decreases there. This is the what we've collected from our college presidents on model recommendation adjustments for the model for going into the next biennium. We've had a number of metrics or proposed metric changes using a 3-year average in all metrics except for square footage. This will help smooth and help with the volatility from year to year. So we'll use a 3-year, propose to use the 3-year average on all the metrics.
Are there any 3-year averages now?
Yeah, we have
So we have one, so the weighted credentials is based on a 3-year rolling average, so the other 90% of the model is currently year to year, so it results in a lot of fluctuation, so we can put that
on. Bill and Sean talked a little bit about this, allowing earned funds to become a part of an institution space. Again, that's college presidents. It's hard to invest in some of those fixed cost increases, those recurring services, not knowing if that funding is going to be available in the following years. Adding an adult learner metric, and that was discussed with the university model. And then the other piece of it was promote equity by accounting for regional differences. We've looked at some different methods to this, and one method we've looked at is allocate an equity adjustment based on community needs index that considers local unemployment, labor force participation, and poverty rates. To accommodate some of these, we'd have to reduce some or adjust some of the weights, reduce the weight of the progression metric from 12 to 7% to reflect retention of the KCTCS students to complete a short-term credential. Merge some of the overlapping credential metrics, the STEM plus H, high wage, high demand, and targeted industry have some overlap, and we have the university have 11 metrics. We have 14, I believe, somewhere in there. They're 14. Reduce the weight of credentials from 15 to 8% to allow an increased focus on URM, underprepared, low income, and transfers. This is just a little overview of what these proposals were on some of the move to 3-year average, reduce some of the weights, adjust some of the weights. Those operational support components stay pretty much the same. There's a couple different iterations on the what we call an equity allocation, what the university model calls a small school adjustment. We have one proposal that holds the small school adjustment the same for all colleges and holds it outside the model, and another iteration that takes that small school adjustment, holds it outside the model, and then redistributes it based on that community needs index score. This is just an overview of those 2 different methods or 2 different iterations that we proposed and presented to the KCTCS college presidents. What you're seeing on the left is the current model calculation and the percentage funding that the model calculation shows, and then there on the right, you'll see the two different iterations that we looked at with the updated metrics, which is moving to a 3-year average, adjusting some of the percentages, adding adult learner, and then, producing some of the overlap and using all those weighted averages. You'll see a slight change on the percentages right there. I think the biggest change is you'll see is 0.25, 0.27%, one way or the other. The second iteration uses that updated metrics along with the community needs index, which takes that small school adjustment, reallocates it out by the community needs index scores. And that provides a little bit more change and allows everybody to get it a little bit closer to equilibrium. And this right here is just showing our movement towards equilibrium. We've been very cognizant of trying to get everybody to that parity or equilibrium level. So what you're seeing there in the blue is the current model calculation. And then what the updated metrics does is in that reddish orange color. And then when we add in that community needs index score, it kind of it has that it makes a difference there too. So the blue is the the gray is the updated metrics with the community needs index.
Before we go any farther, just point out to the group, everybody knows this already. KCTCS has the same institutions, mainly in Eastern Kentucky, Southeastern Kentucky, and in Henderson, that are suffering and has before performance funding. It hasn't stopped the suffering after performance funding. Even though we've got institutions that are actually the way you subsidize the model, if you want to call it that, to those institutions, I think it's fairly unique. You're not leaving them out in the cold. And when the performance funding comes in, it could help them. I think one of the conversations that is not a part of this model, but could be an SJR 98, some other things, is how do we figure out how to help everybody to get where we need to go in these areas. But one question I have is around the community needs index. I find that very interesting in a positive way. But what's included in that community needs index? What variables?
So it is the labor force participation rate, poverty rates, and the unemployment rates.
So are you somehow cross-tabbing the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rates, two very different variables? So you're capturing those that are not even applying it for
Correct.
jobs.
Yes, we
right?
did not want to adjust on just the unemployment because we know that in certain parts of the state, we have much lower participation rates. Actually.
And we were looking in the same way that the university model, looks to get everybody to the starting line. And use that school adjustment. We were looking for ways and methods for our Eastern Kentucky schools, our Southeast hazards, Big Sandy, to be able to participate in a community needs index. And one of the things our college presidents brought up was the serving those needs to the community. And so that was what was presented and proposed to our college presidents. One of the iterations we're looking at today.
Thank you.
When is the study that's being done as part of SJR 98 supposed to be complete?
December 1, right, Lee?
December 1.
December 1.
Yeah, and a part of where I'm going here is, and it's not a big secret where I am on this, I think we're going to have to be, with all our institutions, 4 and 2 year, very mission related to the word of regions, globally concentrating, because we do have regions that are severely suffering. Not saying all of Kentucky doesn't have to eat, but I think somewhere along the way, we're all going to have a conversation on how we're serving the region, at least from a higher ed viewpoint, to a larger, more substantial degree. And so that's why I'm interested in that.
Follow up. What was it? It was done the Huron reform. that was done with KCTCS. Are there suggestions or recommendations in that report to that take in consideration as we consider what we're doing here?
There he is. We are looking at it. You know, I won't make any sort of global statement about the year-round study. I will say there's some things that we can look at that really helps inform us. Some things not. I like the way they brought their data together, for an example, even though it's our data, we can get access to that. I think it tells us a lot. Some of the possible suggestions I probably couldn't go for unless the legislature tells me to go for it. But, you know, one of the pieces that I think it really points to is there is a need for us to be more concentrated on the needs of the community and how we do that, whether it's the Louisville, Lexington, or southeastern or far western Kentucky. So there's some pieces in there that helps. There's some pieces, honestly, that doesn't provide much direction for us.
So on the community needs index, you think that affects the equity portion, that's the whole, that's the small rule adjustment equivalent, right? So you've got, you're creating an index from 3 variables that is applied against the concurrent sum of the equity index. You're not changing the total value like we were talking about with small school adjustment. We're changing the value.
Correct, yeah, so in our current model, we have 10% of the base funding, 165 million, $1.06 million or something per college. It's held outside of the model. What we're taking is that we're taking that 16.5 million, reallocating it out by outside of the model based on that equity index, community needs index. So that's 16.5 million, everybody throws in $1 million and they might get $500,000, they might get 1.5 million. There's that difference.
As we do with the small school adjustment university, I'd like to see the effect on the whole harmless of just that.
Just that piece. Yeah, think about it.
That's a good question.
Before you leave this slide, the last bar to the right is the updated metrics with community needs index. When we say the updated metrics, is that the sum of the prior changes you mentioned as well?
Yeah, the other proposed changes, though,
The full blown thing is the furthest to the right.
correct.
And you still see they're below the bar. Even when that's happening, maybe a little less below the bar.
Yeah.
But they're still below the bar.
Question, so what's on some of the other changes, reducing the weight, the progression metrics, you know, I guess from the longer term to the shorter term. Then the other one, to reduce the weighting, the prudential metric. What's the problem you're solving with
So-
those changes?
So we really want to put more weights in other spots. So we're limited to 100%. So what we're doing is adding an adult credentials metric. So we did focus on credentials rather than credit hours on that one. Doubling the weight for URM for low income credentials, as well as underprepared, which is a metric that we have at the 4 years don't have.
And this also reflects the 3-year smoothing.
Yes. Both the second columns, yeah.
On the merging of the, I'll say the type of credentials, highway shadow man targeted. One reason I'm asking a question about that, I understand the relationship maybe between SIM and highway shadow man. In our current world, those are similar. Right, but targeted, right, is that regional? Or is that part of our statewide,
Those are the statewide five.
that the Workforce Investment Board
Yes.
has identified as sectors? Okay, I just want to make sure I understood the matter.
And let me be clear, there probably is a need somewhere along the way for us to even look at some of those. For example, teacher education, teacher recruitment is not on that top 5, but if you look at it statewide, the new data, it's very much up there as an example. So I think there are ways, even though it may not affect KCPCS as much, I think your point's well taken. But that also includes some of the things that CPE says that are important to a statewide agenda, am I correct?
Okay, so we looked at replacing it right now with kind of those essential jobs. So we also want to make sure that we are factoring in things like childcare, which we know are critical for moving the state forward, but may not be high wage. They're very high need and high. So criminal justice as well, bringing in some of those pieces.
So have you created a metric?
So we have used a potential metric in our calculations now, yes.
And again, you've indicated this is the sum of all those suggestions, which also I presume includes absorbing all the performance, earned performance funds into the base. Or does it not?
The new performance role funding, now this is just the current model calculation. It doesn't take any into consideration in any of the changes proposed for the next biennium beyond what's changed in the model.
But you added an adult metric.
Right, beyond the
But-
change.
So you didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't, as the senator said, you didn't. It didn't include the effect of that into the base.
Into the base. No, it did not.
One of the other things I'll bring up, in case CP says in 4 year, one of the things CP is going to suggest is right now, the way it's stated that every 3 years we revisit these, those don't go along with the biennium very well. So I'm going to suggest that whatever we decide on this time, we revisit every 4 years.
Yeah.
Or 6 years that fits the biennium, right? So I mean, so if that makes sense. So we're going to be proposing that to you both, but simply because the off year probably doesn't do it. So
Yeah, I'm still here. I'll try to not be like.
we try, no,
So.
in our hearts, you'll never make it.
So to clarify, so you asking, were you asking both these two are what the model looks like with those changes? So we ran the model, like the blue was the model in its current form without any changes. The orange was with those changes.
There is no ability to run the model where the earned funds stay in the base for purposes of
Oh,
this
okay, no,
slide.
we have nothing with
There's
the.
no way to do that.
With,
Right.
Well, you possibly could.
we could do that, but we don't, it's not, since those earned funds aren't currently, since any of the performance funds aren't currently in the base, we have. That's right.
Other items you want to give to us?
That's about it. That's all we have for today, and unless we have some more questions, we've been in communications. We presented it to our college presidents in May. We'll probably revisit again as we're getting into the next budget planning, so. And I think the next work group meeting is September, so yeah, so we'll probably try to circle back with the college presidents.
Well, thank you. I know we're over time, so I guess I want to give us some last direction and answer any questions. One is we're going to be sending things out. We'd love for you to say the ones that cause you consternation that you can't live with. It's going to be a little bit different this time, so we can start finalizing. And if there are questions or added things you want to bring to the next performance funding group, will ask you to think about that. What I am asking us to do is that we can get by. We've had a lot of scenarios this year, and we've gone through a lot. If we can get fewer, Dr. Jackson, I think it would be healthy. So if there are things that we want to keep running, do so. We didn't get a chance to talk about the credit hour weighting. I want to give you a hint that right now it's at a 0.50 non-resident credit hour weighting, sorry. It has been suggested by institutions to take it to 1.0. I'm not trying to bias anybody, but I want to tell you from our perspective, it'd be hard for me to fully go to the 1.0, but I could move between the two because we have done some other things for you to help recruit out of state students. So I would like you to think about that and give us some feedback over the emails on those areas. You've got the scenario running here. We'd like to try to put that to bed next time if we could. So the more information we have, the better it would be. Bill, is there anything else we left out of this conversation?
Well, I've got 8 or 10 other scenarios. Stay, walking through those.
And Bill would actually enjoy that, so no. But we do want to get to close to a final I mean, I think we're close. We've got a lot, I should say, for those who have been present, and we've been meeting a lot. We're pretty close to a lot of things we presented today. We're mostly on the page with a couple of small exceptions. So if there's any kind of things you can't live with or that you want to see Bill run the next time with the idea we're trying to limit the running, then let's do that, and that will be our next meeting. And hopefully we can get to this end soon. Any other things to bring to this group? David, look like you got something, no? I mean, I look at you and look like you're always ready to say something, you know? Anything else? It's a beer.
You have an actually scheduled. Probably do.
September 6th.
What I've got on my calendar.
So we're getting close to the end, so I'll ask the legislators and the governor's office that's around the table. Please holler at me if there's some things that really just cause you just headaches. Because I'd like to know what we're operating from, because this is going to take legislation. And so on in the end, so the more we can answer your questions or discuss, the easier time that we have, I guess is a better way of thinking about it. Anything else to bring to this group from anybody? Thank you all very much. Thank you for letting us stay over. We're going to blame Senator Gibbons for being a few minutes late for us staying over.
Deservedly so. Deservedly so.
Thank you.